Hi, everyone. We have a lot of you joining us this evening, so we're going to wait just a few minutes before we get started. All right. Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us right now, we're going to wait a few minutes while we wait for everyone to come in. And I'm so excited to discuss tonight's guest with us. It's going to be a great program. I'll wait just a little bit longer for everyone to join. Don't want to miss anyone. I will say, Kristin, while we're waiting for people, the numbers are still going up. I just reread Four Winds again for the second time. Absolutely loved it. So I'm very excited to discuss it with you tonight.
Well, thank you. I'm excited as well. I haven't read it in a while, so you'll have to let me know.
I was like, oh, I should reread it before tonight. And then it was a pleasure to do so. So it was no chore on my end. All right. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to first of all say welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Hudson Library Historical Society's author series, and tonight we are so honored to welcome award-winning and best-selling author Kristin Hannah to discuss her book, The Four Winds. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to please check out all of our exciting upcoming programs at the Hudson Library. At our website, hudsonlibrary.org, we have so much going on, both virtual and in person, so please check us out. We'd love to see you all, whether you're friendly faces or just online. Fun news, we will be giving away a copy of Four Winds to a lucky reader, so there'll be a link in the chat below, so make sure you click that link and you'll be entered to win. You also can purchase copies of the Four Winds from our local independent bookstore, The Learned Owl, and we'll also include that direct link in the chat tonight. At any point during the event, you're free to ask questions. We're going to take Q&A in the from the audience below, so please leave all your questions for Kristin in the Q&A section on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many as possible tonight. Now that all of that's out of the way, let me introduce tonight's speaker. All right, Kristin Hannah needs no introduction, but she's the best-selling author of over more than 24 novels. And just to highlight some of her amazing books, there was The Nightingale in 2015, which has sold over 4.5 million copies worldwide. It's been published in about 45 different languages, which is insane, and it's been optioned for movie. She also is the author of other books such as The Great Alone, which is set in the isolated wilderness of Alaska and was an instant New York Times bestseller, and Firefly Lane, which was a bestseller hit and is actually now a hit Netflix series, and season 2 is coming out in I think it was April 27th.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Tonight we're going to discuss her latest novel, which is Four Winds. It was an instant #1 hit on New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and the indie bestseller list. It was named the best book of 2021 by the Today Show. The Four Winds is set during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl era and follows the story of one family and their journey to survive, and not just survive, but learn how to stand up for yourself in the pursuit of the American dream. Welcome, Kristin, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're so happy to have you. We have so many excited people here. For those of you who haven't had a chance to read Four Winds, I was wondering if you could just give us a brief description of the book, just to walk through it.
Yeah, this is, I guess at its core, it's a mother-daughter story, but it really is, like you said, it's the story of the American dream and what happens when, you know, you fight for it and it doesn't turn out exactly as you have anticipated. It is set in the 1930s during the Great Depression. It begins in Texas with a young mother and her two children, and because of the drought and the Great Depression, their family farm is failing. And so this young mother has to decide, do I stay where I know things are bad and try to survive, or do I, you know, take my kids in hand and go west and look for work in California, which, you know, she had been told, as so many had, that it was, you know, a land of milk and honey. And so it's her journey to try to really keep her children together and alive and to keep their family going during this incredibly difficult time in American history.
There's a few things I can always expect whenever I pick up one of your books. One is that it's beautifully written, and the other is just the attention to detail. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the research process of this book. I mean, what was that like for you, and what sparked your interest in writing about this particular period?
You know, the second half of that question, which is why this book and why did I write it and what inspired me, it really goes back to another novel, The Nightingale, which I wrote, I don't know, I guess it was 7 years ago now. And that book was a real change for me because it was this sort of lost women's historical story about the women of the French Resistance. And I loved writing it. I was terrified to write it, but I loved writing it. And when it came out, and I was doing my book tours and meeting readers and talking to readers, I really began to understand how much it meant to women in particular that their grandmothers and their mothers' stories were being told, because so much of our historical record is about what men were doing at any given time. And so in hearing, you know, how much The Nightingale meant to women, I really wanted to essentially write an American Nightingale. I wanted to write a novel that had that same kind of impact, that sparked conversations among family, that passed history on to our daughters and granddaughters, but was quintessentially American. And, you know, in looking back through history, there was so much going on in the Great Depression that felt relevant to me 5 years ago when I started this 4 years ago. And of course, the Dust Bowl was the greatest environmental disaster in American history. And climate change was so in the news that I thought it was really great to be able to show this terrible environmental disaster that had been partially caused by humans, that it was also you know, partially solved by humans. And so I thought there was a message of hope there that I thought was important. I did not know, of course, that it would come out in the middle of a worldwide pandemic and, you know, it would feel even more relevant.
As I say, the book felt oddly poignant reading it, knowing everything that's going on, and just how far people are going to protect their families was just very, it was strangely timely, even
Yeah,
though.
I know.
Yeah.
I didn't see that one coming either. But it was really nice in the middle of all of that because I turned in The Four Winds in March of 2020, which is right when my state, Seattle, went on complete lockdown. And, you know, there was so much fear and we were all so nervous and afraid and uncertain. And so it was really great to have this book that comes out and says, essentially, we have been through really hard times before. And if we pull together, if we work together, if we care for each other, we can not only survive, we can thrive. And so I was really glad that that was sort of the ultimate message of the novel.
I would agree. It's courage in the face of great uncertainty.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about like how I mean, when you're researching a book like this, what do you go through? Do you travel? I mean, I don't know what traveling would be like for this, but or when you're writing it, but I mean, I noticed on your website you list so many different sources that you look like. How do you go through all of that information, which there is a ton,
Which there is, yes, a
which
lot.
there's certainly no
Um,
shortage.
Well, first of all, I love the research, which helps, obviously. And the way I sort of like with this particular book, I picked the Great Depression because it just seemed really relevant to me, but I knew nothing about it. And all I knew about the sort of migrants in California was what we all knew, I think, which was The Grapes of Wrath, which I hadn't read, since college. And so I have to begin in the broadest possible way. So I'm reading about what's going on in the Great Depression, socially, fiscally, politically, all of those sorts of things. And as I read about everything that's going on in the US, it becomes very clear to me that in my opinion, the most remarkable center of this is the Dust Bowl, because you have the confluence of both of these, terrible events. And so that narrows it down to a 3 or 4 state choice. And then I begin, doing research about those states. And then I just sort of make a choice on what my setting is going to be. And that's where the really fun stuff happens. That's when I start reading memoirs and children's books or newspaper articles or firsthand interviews, basically whatever I can find. And that's when I begin to get to the point where every book I read, I'm like, I know this, I've read this. Then I know that it's time to stop researching, which is fun, and start writing, which is terrifying. And so then I just sort of begin. And generally what I have begun doing in the last few years is I go ahead and write like half of the novel. And then I go on my research trips, so my husband and I went to Texas and Oklahoma, and we drove Route 66 back to California and followed the migrant path. That migrant camp from Grapes of Wrath is still there. You can, visit it. And then it means a lot more to me because I know exactly, or at least I think I know, where the story is going. And I really am kind of this combination of an endless research paper and a magpie who just picks up every shiny thing and stores it to see when I need it.
That's fascinating to hear, because one of the things a colleague and I were remarking today in preparation for your visit this evening was just how grounded your books feel. And we're like, she has to do so much research because everything just feels very real and grounded in a way that only comes across when someone's actually.
I think so. And what's interesting? I think a big part of it, sort of looking back on all of this, I came of age as a fantasy geek girl, right? I'm the Lord of the Rings, I'm Stephen King, I'm, the Golden Compass. I just love all of those huge epic world building kinds of novels. And I think one of the things I have taken from them, and one of the things I've learned, is that world building is grounded in intimate detail, whether it's the moon or Mars or Texas in the 30s. And so it's very important to me to sort of plunge you into this story, both in the character's shoes, which means a lot of character development, and in setting, which means carefully chosen world building.
I would agree. And your characters themselves feel very grounded and very real and relatable. I was wondering if you could talk a bit you mentioned you feature a lot of strong female protagonists and a lot of relatable female protagonists, a lot of actually just relatable protagonists in general. Can you touch a bit on the character of Elsa and what inspired you behind her? I loved her journey so much.
Elsa is a very different sort of character arc in my writing career, in that so like I said, I do about a year's worth of research, and in that year I develop the plot and the characters and the story, and I do a version of an outline that, you know, shows the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. And is when I begin. And so that's what I did with the Four Winds. And in the middle of the second year, I was about 450 pages into the first draft. And that's when I created Elsa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was a real problem.
I would say so.
It was not her book. It was not her story. She was, you know, kind of a walk-on secondary character. And I just knew instantly in creating her, the failure, the thing that I had missed before in this whole book was motherhood. And, you know, I was writing about the Great Depression. I was writing about the Dust Bowl and family farms and the American dream. But it wasn't until Elsa appeared that I realized that this was really a novel about motherhood. And so I had to throw away all those 450 pages and start over and write, you know, I mean, this is write Elsa's novel essentially. And I think it's because, you know, my books don't necessarily start out about these warrior women who find their voice. But I think ultimately what I have to say in life is that, you know, character is forged by adversity, and women have to learn to speak up. And those are, I think, two things that sort of inform all of my books, and Elsa's particularly.
I think that's why, I mean, I won't speak for everyone, but I'll speak for myself. I think that's why I've enjoyed your book so much, is that the characters don't come in like Wonder Woman. They don't have all the answers. They don't know everything. They're not instantly being able to detect the bright past. There, I mean, there's a great uncertainty. They're not sure. They make wrong mistakes. They wait when they should have acted. They're real in a sense, and the fact that you can follow someone's growth and, I mean, developing a backbone in her case.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the challenge for women in general. You know, I think for humans in general, you know, I think we all need to learn to stand up for ourselves and speak out, you know, for what we believe in. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a lot more interesting and a lot more realistic and a lot more relatable to present a character that doesn't have perfect knowledge or perfect self-esteem or perfect understanding, because, you know, kind of bumbling along, whether it's motherhood or your job or school or, you know, whatever, we all have to find our own way in our own time.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that's what I've enjoyed so much. We have a lot of questions coming in. So make sure if you guys have a question for Kristin tonight, please leave it in the Q&A. I would also want to know, I guess this is partly because of my own selfish interest. Have you ever been tempted? I mean, you had many wonderful novels. Have you ever been tempted to revisit a character or continue their story? Like for Elsa's daughter, I would love to know further, which I guess is the making of a good book, that you always are left like, I wish we could know more.
Yes, you know, my whole career I have heard, when is the sequel? When is the sequel? When is the sequel? And I've only done that once. You know, I did Fly Away, the sequel to Firefly Lane. And I had always intended, in fact, I intended that to be a 3-book series. And I always intended the Four Winds to be Elsa's story first and Loreda's story second. But the trouble is that when it's all said and done, it seems that I'm in love with Loretta. I mean, I just adore her. And it's really important to me that she has a story that is as strong and as powerful as The Four Winds. And I haven't found that yet. So if and when I do, I will write the story. It could be next. I mean, it won't be the next book, but it could be, you know, the next book down the road.
I think that's, I mean, it's always hard, especially when you start to grow so fond of characters. So then like, you're like, no, I would like to know more of what you're doing.
Well,
Like,
I do envy these people, you know, like Michael Connelly, who can write about the same character for years and develop them and tell different stories. I mean, what a gift. But I don't know. I don't know that I could stay in one lane that long.
that is very understandable. But if you ever do write that sequel,
I'll let you know.
I would love to read it. I do have a few questions before I turn it over because we have so many audience, I know, coming in multiple ways. But I would like to know, could you tell us a bit about your writing career? Like how'd you got started and then what was that process like for you?
Yes, so I used to be a lawyer. I was a lawyer before. And when I was, I guess when I was in my third year of law school, so I was like 26, 25 years old, something like that. My mother was dying of breast cancer. And so I was, you know, in her hospital room visiting her all the time. And, you know, we were talking about all sorts of things. And at one point she made this, you know, shocking comment that I was destined to be a writer. And it was so odd because I showed no talent. I showed no interest. I had never even taken a creative writing class. And ultimately she said, you know what, we should write a book together, the two of us. And so, you know, being mother and daughter, we immediately started arguing about what kind of book to write. I wanted to write either horror or fantasy, and she wanted to write historical romance. And, you know, ultimately she said, look, I'm sick, I pick, we are writing historical romance, and that's it. And so for the rest of the time, you know, after law school, I would go and stand in the library stacks and, you know, Xerox pages and pages and pages of research material for this book that Mom and I were going to write. And ultimately, you know, she passed away, and I put everything in a box and threw it in the closet with no intention of trying to write a historical romance novel. And then a few years later, when I got pregnant with my son, I had a tough pregnancy and I was bedridden for 6 months. And so I thought, hey, maybe I'll try writing that book now. And that sort of, I had all this stuff, you know, like a gift from my mom. And I realized at that point that I really wanted to be an at-home mom. And writing seemed like something that I could try my hand at. And I thought, I'll do this for 4 or 5 years. And if, you know, if he's in first grade and I'm not any better at this, then I'll go back to the law. And I sold my first book when he was 2.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah. I feel my mother over, you know, watching over me all the time. And of course, Firefly Lane was the book about her breast cancer that I finally found the courage to sort of look at her life. I wanted to see it from her perspective. And so that was the book that came from that.
That was amazing. What does a typical writing day look like for you? Like, is there, I mean, you have a lot, you mentioned about how deep you go into research and you even throw away so many pages when you rewrote, but what does a typical day appear like?
I mean, it kind of depends a little bit on where I am in the process. You know, if I'm researching, a typical day is reading. And, you know, by and large, I start work at 8 a.m. and I finish work at 4 or 4:30 p.m. Every day. I have lunch with my husband, but other than that, you know, I am at work. And I write longhand on yellow legal pads. So I don't sit in an office. I sit on my deck. I sit on a patio. I sit in the living room, wherever I feel like. And I just am one of those believers in inspiration follows process, not precedes it. So I don't wait to be inspired. And I give myself permission, you know, to write a bad book, because that's actually kind of required. It takes a long time. Even within the process of one book, it takes a long time to get good. But over the course of a career, it takes a long time. And so if there's any writers out there, what I would say is the only way you really fail is if you stop or give up. And I just keep going.
I know we have some local aspiring writers joining us this evening, because I can see their questions coming in. So I have a few ones, but I think they might be better to end on. So
okay.
I have a few questions, but speaking of writing, Ed would like to know, should a character respond to change or be an agent of change? I think Elsa was definitely both, but when you're...
That's an interesting question. I think the most important element is change and conflict. So it depends on sort of, you know, whether your character is driving the plot or whether the plot is pushing the character into new and uncomfortable situations. So I would say that it doesn't really matter. The question about an agent of or a responder to is less important than making sure that you have conflict in every single scene and that conflict escalates throughout the book all the time. They used to say, back when I was an early writer, you know, you put your character up in a tree and make them go higher and higher and higher. And that's sort of an expression of make sure that there's always conflict, because one of the things you find if you're a good writer, and most of us who try to write books are good writers, you can actually write scenes in books without conflict. And then you don't quite understand why people put them down or why they don't buy them. So conflict and stakes, that's my answer.
Sounds good. And the book definitely has both of that in there. Erica would like to know, you had talked about how you redirected the story. How soon after you began developing Lisa's story did you know how her story was going to end?
Oh, well, no spoilers, because of course not everybody has read The Four Winds, but
Right.
I can tell you that the ending of this book was difficult. I probably tried 15 or 16 versions of it. So what I knew was what was going to happen in California. I knew that Elsa was going to come into her own, that she was going to begin to use her voice to fight for people who weren't strong enough to fight for themselves. I knew that her relationship with her daughter was going to change and grow and all of those sort of things. But the actual end of the book, I did not know this time.
Sounds good. I will not give away the ending, but it is an emotional roller coaster.
Yes.
Which I think is actually putting it very mildly.
Yes.
Trying to go through, we have a lot coming in. Someone actually wrote in, and this would be interesting. Can you talk a little bit about the meaning behind the title?
This is so funny. This was a book that well, I'm not very good at titles anyway. I don't have a lot of interest. I'm not very good at it. And so I tend to turn books in under whatever title I can think of. And then pray that somebody on my team is better at this. And this particular book, we just never found it. And we were looking at it, my team, my agent, my editors, everybody's starting to love the book. And I cannot remember now what the title was, but everyone said the title blows. We got to do, we got to find something here. And it was about February of 2020, just before I turned in the final version. My husband and I had bought tickets for our kids to go see Frozen on stage at the Pantages in Los Angeles. And so we're in Los Angeles traffic. It was like a Sunday afternoon. And so we're stopped on the freeway, and this bus pulls up right next to me, parks next to me on the freeway, and it says The Four Winds across the side of the bus. And I immediately reached for my phone and said, I looked up, and I had used in the book the phrase, they were scattered to the four winds. And I still didn't see it until the bus pulled up next to me. And so I texted to my agent, my editor, and everybody said, this is it. And then the struggle, of course, is to find the perfect cover. There's all these moments along the way, and I think what they came up with for the Four Winds is pretty stunning.
I agree, and I'm actually curious. This is something I didn't know too much about until we started doing so many more virtual author programs, getting the opportunity to discuss with authors. How much input do you have on your cover art, or just? Well,
now I have a lot of input. I have had, I had a decade where I had no input, and nobody, asked my opinion, and I would give it, but nobody cared. And I think about Firefly Lane was the beginning, because this book meant so much to me, and I felt that it had so much to say. And that's when I really started. I found a publisher who would really collaborate with me. And I'm very collaborative in editing, in everything. I love people, giving input. And that's when I think things really started to change. And then, I think we really hit our stride with The Nightingale, which is beautiful.
It is gorgeous. And I would hold up a copy of The Four Winds tonight, but I gave my copy to my mom to read, so she currently has it. Rebecca would like to know, you've written many different books. She wants to know, do you have a particular favorite to write? Do you like writing historical fiction, or do you have a preference?
I don't know. I seem to have a limited attention span. So I'll write something for a couple of books, and then I'll try something else, and then I'll try something else, and then I'll try something else. The through line, of course, is women's lives, women's struggles, women's relationships. I've been doing that from the very beginning. But I think I've kind of written enough historicals now that I'm a little interested again in going back contemporary. So I'm not exactly sure. It's all writing, it's all, the words on the page. I do like interspersing, say, The Four Winds, which is a huge research undertaking, with something like The Great Alone, which is much more in my wheelhouse, in my backyard, something I know about already. So I like to do, heavy research, and then maybe not so much, to give myself a breather.
I think that's one of the things I know, not only myself, but other people have enjoyed your book so much, is that you jump time periods, you jump, historical fiction, non-historical fiction, you get something different, but the focus, like you said, on the female characters and the strong relationships, that's always the same, and it's always fascinating to read. So that I'm enjoying.
That's another thing, for the writers in the room. One of the things you hear so much as a young writer is you need to find your voice. You need to find your voice. And you think that your voice is how you string sentences together or how you put words together. And it's really, your voice is your worldview. Your voice is what you have to say. And I think it's pretty clear, looking at my work from the beginning, what I have to say. It took me decades to figure it out myself, but I was writing it nonetheless.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it's what makes it links the books without they're actually not being linked, but
Yeah.
you can always depend on that. Oh, goodness gracious, we have so many good questions I'm trying to scroll through. Oh, okay. Christine wrote, let me try it again. Out of the Four Winds characters that touched my heart was the security guard at the hospital. Can you speak a bit about your writing process for this particular character? Or do you have any other unsung characters you'd like?
Yeah, the other one I suspect that she would say the same thing about is the beauty salon owner. And I think part of it was, on my part, this knowledge that this book was, deep and dark, and we were going to a lot of really difficult emotional places. And it was so important to have these moments where just human to human people, reach out to one another and change the course of your day. And, I always think about, there's always those signs out there, like, you never know what someone is going through, so be kind. And that's something that I think that little interaction sort of typifies. I also loved the relationship between Jean and Elsa, these two mothers in the migrant camp, both of whom were, pretty beaten down by life and by circumstance, and yet they're still able to find these girlfriend moments and to forge a girlfriend bond and sort of help each other through these hard times.
I loved how relatable those two characters were. I mean, a lot of it, their setting, what they were going through was horrible, but some of their conversations just felt like how you, like at a coffee shop, like the conversations and stuff could have taken place anywhere at any time. It's just the bond is the same. The circumstances were horrible, but that part persists. Laura would like to know, I've always wondered this about authors, if a character was not created from a real person or persons, there's ever been someone in the wild that reminds you of one of the characters in the book? So if there's someone that, or something you've come across, if there was like an amalgamation of different historical people.
I have never like fully based any character on anyone that I knew or imagined I knew, like a celebrity or something. And I don't think I've ever written a character and then seen someone out in the world and thought, oh, that's exactly, who that is. I think just because, I don't know, maybe because they're just so fully formed in my head that I'm not necessarily looking, out that way. And I'm very careful not to do real people, especially within my own family, because I just don't want to hear about it.
Fair point on that. I'm sure if you did based off family members, you'd get a lot of maybe unwanted input.
Yes.
We do have another person, and I also had the same question. Another Laura in the chat would like to know, so they listen to a lot of the books on audio and they're listening to Four Winds currently. Do you listen to any of your books, or do you have any input on audiobook narrators or any of that styling?
That's been so interesting. I believe it was The Great Alone that I first connected with Julia Whalen, who has done The Great Alone and The Four Winds. And meeting her has been just kind of a dream come true. It's been so interesting to watch how her process for this, and how she basically takes, my art form and through her own art, tries to sort of give life to my books. And I think she just does an amazing and remarkable job. I have trouble listening to my own audio, mostly because I want to rewrite the book. And I can't imagine how that sentence made it through is still there. It's the same reason I don't read out loud anymore in public, because I'm just too much of, it's not perfectionist. I'm just too, I don't know, neurotic maybe. But yes, I do get to give input on who the narrators are now. And then it just comes down to, are they available? Because people like Julia Whalen are so in demand that, you have to be way ahead.
I think it's always interesting. We've been able to interview another author, Linda Castillo, with her audiobook narrator, both of them, and they've worked together for so many books, and they've really developed a relationship to each other and to their characters.
Oh, really?
And it's fascinating because to hear how they developed, and I feel like Julia, with narrating your books, has the same, like she feels like she picks up on the vibe of not just the book, but the characters, and like just gets it. And it's,
yeah, she's an actress. I mean, and so she's really able to sort of bring that element to the fore.
As a performance, it's a delight to listen to. So hopefully you two can pair up again in the future.
Yes, I hope so.
Goodness gracious. Someone would like to know about the research process for this book. Did you review Dorothea Lange's photographs to get a feel for the visual representation of the Great Depression?
Yes, I mean, Dorothea Lange's and Arthur Rothstein's, there are a lot of the WPA photographs of the era, but of course, primarily Dorothea Lange, were just so informative, and for mood, for feeling, for description, everything. And she has a particular one, I believe it's called Woman of the High Plains. And to me, I look at that and it's Elsa, absolutely and completely. And I see this woman who, is in terrible circumstances, who doesn't know what's going on. She probably has children just out of view, and she's looking to the horizon. And you can tell that even sort of as beaten as she is by life, she will forge ahead. She is looking to the future, and she will do what she needs to do to keep her children fed. And I just find that so heroic and courageous.
I was thinking of her particular photographs while reading this book, and it felt like stepping into one of them at times. So I'm glad to know. Let's see here. Noreen would like to know, my book club and I thoroughly enjoyed reading The Nightingale as well as your other books. She loves some of the descriptions used in The Nightingale and also other books. How do you come up with it? She particularly highlighted in The Nightingale the description of a character's breath being like that of crushed insects. Like, how do you come up with something so unique like that?
I don't know. I'm always trying in all of my writing to be as specific and, as I said earlier, as world buildingly complete as possible. And the way I actually do it is I write 10 or 15 sentences for every one that you read in the book. And so I just, describe something as much as I can and as deeply as I can. And then on subsequent drafts, I go back and I take out as many of them as I can. And then in the first paragraph and the last paragraph of the novel in particular, I just keep doing that month after month after month. I think the beginning of The Nightingale, which is something like in love you find out who you want to be, and in war you find out who you are. I think it took me years to come up with that, because I had to see what the entire book was. and then try to encapsulate it in the beginning.
Sounds fascinating. We had a lot of people, when you had mentioned the pages you had thrown out before you discovered Elsa and her story. We had two people write in. We've actually had several. Wanted to know, what did you do with the pages you had tossed out? And was there the original character? Were they still in the final?
Yes. So the original version, Loretta and Rafe were brother and sister. And the novel was a love story with Loretta. And she went to California, and the book went on for another 10 years, actually, in that version. I still have it. You know, there are parts of it I like, but the interesting thing about sort of the creative process is part of it for me is getting to the end, writing what I want to write, living in that world, pulling all my research together, creating the characters. And so now I've already done that in all of that section, even though it didn't work. So I'm not particularly interested in going back. You know, I occasionally hear, oh, you could make it a short story, or, you know, oh, you could be a novella. And I mean, I suppose I could, but I'm too busy moving forward to look back.
Understandable. You have a lot going on and a lot planning. Jill wanted to speak because you talked about looking back. Do you ever reread your books, or do you ever look back on something?
Not if I can help it. No, I mean, I read them so many times when I'm writing them, and it's funny because, you know, like you said earlier, so many people want sequels, they want spin-offs, they want, you know, a new character, or we want to know what's going on with Loretta or whoever, Lenny. And the truth is that once I get to the end, I have rewritten versions of those books and those lives so many times that I really say goodbye to the characters. I really like, thank you, it's been great, I gotta run.
After rewriting and working on it that long, that would be my reaction as well.
Yeah,
It's been wonderful, but I need to meet someone new.
exactly.
Plus, you don't know if she spent all her time revisiting characters that we love, which would be fantastic. We'd never get different books where we could beg for those sequels. We have Marcia would like to know a little bit about your writing process. How do you start when you're anxious, and what's the first thing you do to begin? So if someone's like a new author, they're looking to start, or any words of advice to give to them?
You know, I'll tell you this, and maybe this is a comfort. So I've written, I don't know, 25, 26 books, something like that. I've been doing this now for 30 years. And every time I start a new book, I wonder if I still have it in me. I wonder if the last one wasn't the last one. You know, am I actually going to be able to take all these things in my head and convert them into something as cohesive as a story? And so from that, I would say, first off, your fear, your worry, your anxiety, your neuroses, it's all okay. It's all ordinary. It's all something that every New York Times author feels, that, you know, it's across the board. This is what writing is. And the trick is to put all of that aside and to sit down and actually write. And as I said earlier, I write longhand. And one of the reasons I write longhand nowadays is because I am such a strong self-editor that on the computer, I just deleted everything. I would write a sentence and delete it, write a sentence and delete it. And it's just too much trouble to scratch it out on a pad. And so I just keep going. And I think part of the thing for new novelists is to understand that you can only write your way to a book. And I guarantee you, it won't be perfect. But by the time you get to the halfway mark, if you can get to the halfway mark, you will be better, and you will look back and, you will see things that you can revise and change and focus better. And then you just keep going. And then of course, the greatest trick of all is you finish one, and whether it doesn't sell, or whether it gets terribly reviewed, or whether, nobody likes it, or it's a bestseller, it still is the job to sit down and write the next book. And that's not only how a career is made, but that's how a writer is made.
Thank you. That felt like a masterclass for people who are just needed the push to get started. To follow up, this is actually the perfect question that just came in. Someone would like to know, you talked a lot about bringing a story to life and how that process is. How stepping away from a process once it's finished, once it's turned in, once it's done and you've said goodbye to the characters, how much time do you take to step away from that before you start back up again?
Well, when I was young and I was doing this as a young mother, I always had the next book sort of in the back of my head. I was always sort of thinking, okay, what's going to be next? What's going to be next? So I would take, very little downtime, mostly because I had very little time. I was writing books during nap time, during kindergarten, during birthday parties, by the pool, whatever it was. I had very little time, so I had to use it very effectively. Nowadays, when I have lots of time to do this, I find that it takes me a while to find whatever the next idea is. They don't come as quickly. They require a lot of research. I'm sort of thinking bigger than I used to, and that takes some time. So, I guess to actually answer the question, let's say, 3 or 4 months of me spiraling through ideas, thoughts, characters, interests, issues, themes, books, research, until I find the thing that I'm willing to spend 3 years working on, the question I'm willing to answer, to research for 3 years.
Thank you. We get to hear both sides of the writing process, which is always fascinating to hear different authors' response and what it looks like for them and how that process goes. It's something I've truly enjoyed learning. And it's all so unique and fascinating.
And that's the thing too. There is no right answer.
No.
If it works for you, it works. I've got best friends that I've grown up writing with, and, none of our processes are the same. The only thing that is the same is that for those of us who have written a lot of books, who have made a career out of it, we don't wait for inspiration. We don't wait for hours and hours of time to be available to us. We push writing into our lives instead of waiting for it to fit comfortably.
That seems to be the consistent from what we've over asking authors during this time. That's been the consistent answer. We have 2, I'm sure you can guess, questions that have come up the most, which I've been saving to the end.
Okay.
Figured we'd hold off to the end, even though we have about 1 million of the same. So the first one, I'm pretty sure you can guess which the 2 are. People want to know about the process. Several of your books have been optioned into TV and movies, especially we mentioned Firefly Lane season 2 is coming out. What does that process look like? Do you have any input? Do people want to know, do you get to meet the people? What does that look like on your end?
It's the whole Hollywood movie, TV, series thing is as different as the people who are doing it. So for example, I have some projects that I'm very involved with, and I'm reading and, and talking to people. And then there are others where I don't know what's going. For example, Firefly Lane season 2.5 or whatever is coming up in 2 weeks. I haven't even seen it. I don't even know like what's happening. I'm waiting to see with all of my readers to see how close it fits to the book. So it really just depends. I will say one of the coolest moments of all of this was in the first season of Firefly Lane. They do what's called a table read, which is they have the script and all the cast sits at a table and they just read the script out loud. And so sitting there with, Katherine Heigl and Sarah Chalke and Ben Lawson and listening to what these actors are able to bring to life was really, really fun.
That has to be just a wild experience to see, like the thing you've been writing and the thing you've been envisioning and seeing it on the screen has to just be very, I don't know the right word to use. It just has to be very weird to see like
Yes, it's weird. And the thing is, it's difficult for readers too. And I'm, obviously a huge reader. So it is rare that any adaptation lives up to how we feel about our favorite books, because they're so in our head and they've been there for so long that it's really miraculous, I think, when you see something on screen that is exactly as you imagined it.
I think no matter what, we all have the book and vision in our head. And it's so individual. It's interesting to see, and it must be just wild to actually be able to meet your characters in real life. That would be fascinating. So we have one final question before we wrap up this evening. I'm sure you're aware of where this is going. People would like to know what is next for you. I know.
I know. So I've been told I'm not allowed to say anything because people my publisher is doing whatever it is they do. But I can tell you that the new book is it's done, and it'll be coming out in 2024. I do know that. And it is it goes along the lines of The Nightingale and The Four Winds. It's about a female character sort of, learning to find her footing and stand up for herself and find out what she believes in a very tumultuous era of history.
Well, if it's anything like your previous books, I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. I already can't wait to read it. I'm sure we'll get calls wanting to know when the library will have it. The answer is not yet.
Not yet. I think we'll know before early summer.
Well, we can't wait to find out. And it's been just an absolute joy being able to speak with you this evening. Kristin, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your questions and your support. And for those of you that are writing, just keep at it, keep going. It's a great job, and just keep believing in yourself.
Yes, that's great words for our audience. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Make sure to check out the link to purchase if you're looking for a copy of The Four Winds or any of Kristin Hannah's books. Our local independent bookstore, The Learned Owl, has them on hand. We love supporting them. We also have copies available here for you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, and have a great night.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you, Kristin.
Take care. Bye-bye.